Hello again, and welcome to the In-Scope podcast. My name is John Scott. I will be your host for today. I'm one of the co-founders over at Scope Stack, where we're automating all your IT services needs. And so with this, I have a buddy of mine, mentor, just someone that I admire the way he thinks. And he's been in this industry and doing some really cool stuff. So Nicko Roussos, VP over at TD SYNNEX for operations and digital transformation. Man, thank you for joining me on the In-Scope podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man.
Appreciate the kind of show.
I think I kind of like to tell a story how we first met because it was funny. So I think it was like a 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning LinkedIn message, which I got like the next day. So this is how Nicko's mind works, right? He's always got these ideas and these thoughts like in his head. I just picture him waking up and messaging this random person. But that's where it all started, right? Like I always had this idea of Disty, just worried about product and like selling their stuff, right? And so for you to reach out and say, hey, I'm looking to do something different for our MSPs, our VARs that we serve. And it wasn't like about product at all. It was just this really eye-opening experience for me to have a conversation with someone in distribution that was talking and interested, quite honestly, about things other than product. Right. And so, that's your job, right, is to help these organizations transform from what they're currently doing. And maybe just give me a little high level, like, what does that look like day in, day out for you?
Yeah, it's interesting the way you describe it, because that's exactly how that's the legacy of distribution. We kind of sit in the middle of the channel and we're just kind of a route to market. And I think as everybody got more intelligent, trying to make more margin, we tried to build services around the core framework of a distributor. And, it took me a couple of years to kind of dive in and really understand the day in the life of a customer. And that's what removed the blind spots. So I just had this natural curiosity to understand how our customers are adding value in the channel. And by that token, kind of to learn the end to end and realize there's a ton of opportunity on the table.
Yeah, because like there's this transformation that's happening from, traditional VAR into MSP into now solutions provider, right, and service provider and outcomes, right? And so I kind of want to pick your brain on these stages and how you help and all that stuff. But right, it's not just about product anymore. That is one of the tools in your toolbox when you're going to market and you're trying to solve problems for a client. And so how do you kind of insert yourself? I heard you mention like interviews and talking, like, is this just that natural curiosity piece coming out and you're like, hey, you're just asking all the questions to truly understand what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We live in a competitive world, right? And we've got to try and differentiate. And the way we try to do that is by creating differentiated value. I'm not going to be one to pretend that I just sit in a boardroom with my colleagues and try to figure out every problem within our four walls. So I impress it upon the entire army that I have the opportunity to lead, to go listen first, and then build next. And so everything that we do is with the customer in mind, for the customer. And we're trying to help them with that build, buy, partner decision as they try to scale and grow and accelerate in the market.
What have you seen because you get to see all sorts of varieties of, we'll just call them service providers, right? Like the ones just starting out, the very mature ones. Can you kind of speak to that evolution, and then what takes a lower end, or not a lower end, a early IT service provider and allows them to grow into an enterprise level IT service provider? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. There's so many things I could throw at that question, because it's such a good one, honestly. Because I think tied very closely is this technology evolution. Like, you use evolution, that's a really good word to describe what we're going through, right? There's these different technology curves we're experiencing, and tied closely to that is the business evolution, the different expectations and experiences that we all expect, and they're very close knit. So the consumption of technology has gotten a lot easier by way of the hyperscalers and they've really changed and shifted the thinking in terms of what's possible, even for a smaller VAR with cloud-based, SaaS-based solutions, uh, as well as the introduction of kind of like the API technology, which is far easier to consume than the legacy EDI, which is a very expensive infrastructure to build and support. So, with all that being said, you have the ability now. You've armed an entire ecosystem of partners, big and small, to be able to consume technology and build experiences that weren't afforded to them in the past. So I think there's a portfolio of options for our customers now. And then the other way I'd answer that is because we have an ecosystem of partners that leverage TD SYNNEX. They come in all shapes and sizes. They have a different balance sheet and income statement profile. They all are afforded the opportunity to maybe invest in their business and transformation in different ways. That's where Disty, I think, is really kind of pivoted in terms of augmentation of, hey, tell me what's absent in your portfolio, and let me augment with the vast array of services that I have. And that's what's maybe set us apart from the legacy distribution model is how do we create a fingerprint model for each customer that we serve?
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting to see too, like just having seen you work and your team in the background, like it's really gone from this provider mentality to a partner mentality. You know what I mean? And so, it, again, like I said, like it's not just provider of hardware and licensing. Now it's a partner, and okay, well, I mean, now with the TD SYNNEX merger, you'll have so many capabilities that are out there. But like you can offer services, you can offer product, you can offer finance. Like there are all these things, right? And like that's all, again, like the MSP or IT service provider really, they can't do it all, right? Like they can't have all those capabilities on their bench at all times. It's just not effective. And so to be able to partner with an organization like yours and think through what it looks like to truly partner is pretty awesome, right? And so you mentioned like augmentation. And the services side or whatnot. But I guess I want to like ask a follow-up question there, which is as you start thinking about like adding in automation, software, all this stuff, like do you the successful organizations, do they have that kind of nailed down? Do they have like a process nailed down before they start adding in software? Or are you seeing like software being a guiding? Does that make sense?
So
because you've lived this also yourself, right?
Yeah, I will tell you, just based on the vendor that I represent, they're very mature in nature, but they're also going through a major shift in offer structures and the implications that has on operations in itself. So what I would tell you is over the years of, and maybe this is well understood amongst the masses, but something that just a light bulb went off maybe a year or two ago is as you approach a problem statement, I always think automation first. But the fact is that automation might not necessarily be possible. Like when I say automation, I mean in the form of API, like completely frictionless interconnectivity between two entities, right? Second best in my mind is bot. If you can automate with bot and introduce software and AI that makes the job easier, I think that's door number 2. And door number 3 is people. And it's not to necessarily discount people, right? It's about how do we kind of automate the remedial tasks to allow people to pivot to higher value. I'm a firm believer in that. And I always try to push people upstream and make them uncomfortable, right? But it helps them kind of grow in their career. But I share that perspective because every problem statement that comes up, every constituent is faced with door 1, 2, or 3. They just don't know. Like historically speaking, everybody just pivots to door number 3, which is headcount, because that's the easy button, right? Let's just hire headcount. But the problem is with compressed margins and a competitive experience that's required by the end user, like you can't really deliver that experience by way of people. It just doesn't scale. So in terms of being able to progress, we've got to look at automation from end to end.
Yeah. I was thinking of like these A words as you were talking about those doors. So there's automation, the bot piece is like augmentation, right? Because there's it's people and light automation. And then there's there's a saying around like, don't miss the people for the process or something like that. Like the people part is important, and it will always be important regardless if you're doing automation or augmentation, right? Because we can only science so much. right? But I
Exactly.
agree. Like I go to automation, of course. Like, I have a problem. How do I do this? I don't ever have to do it again. Our CTO always tells me, he says, if you come and ask me to do something twice, like I'm going to build something that automates that. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
I think you need to I think as a business too, that applies, because there might be something that you're doing one time and it's not worth the investment in automating it or whatnot. But if I'm doing something over and over and over again, like it makes a ton of sense to build a process and a system to help you scale, right? Because that's where that partnership that I was talking about earlier with you and your team is super critical and key, because there are transactions that happen all the time. So like, how do we make that frictionless? How do we roll in our partners into our overall like solution building aspect? Again, you and I could talk about this stuff like for days and days and days, because we just think very similarly.
Yeah.
But like where, good.
No, the one thing I was just going to say real quick is the other thing that I've learned, and this is a really hard code to crack. I'm still trying to get my arms around this problem statement, but as problem statements arise, I'm trying to identify the timeline associated with getting from headcount to API automation as quickly as possible. Like, what does that window look like? What does it require? And you can compress it as much as you want, but at the same token, this is what makes it tricky. You've got to bring people along the journey, because if one goes faster than the other, you kind of leave folks behind, and it diminishes their value. That's not something I necessarily want to do, right? It's more so giving them the capacity to be able to do. So trying to master that is going to keep me up for many nights to come.
Well, I expect to get all my 3 a.m. messages from you for that. All right, so we kind of talked about like the platform piece. I mean, I think there's there are people skills that come along with that. There's platform. There's all that stuff, right? But like, where do you see this all going? Like, what's the evolution and the transformation that is happening? Like, if you were to get a magic globe out or whatever that thing's called, like look into the future, what would you? Is there anything really different?
Yeah. No, when I look at our industry, the technology industry specifically, and how clients expect to consume the value, I look at maybe, and it's pretty binary, and it's probably not fair to kind of scope it this way, but I look at clients are either they're going to have their own IT resources to be able to maintain their infrastructure and drive digital transformation within their own right, or they're going to outsource it to another entity. So what I've just described is fundamentally a resell model versus an MSP model. I think the partner of the future can accommodate. If I'm a perfect partner, I can probably accommodate both, right? Because in the traditional resell motion, not only am I procuring the technology, but I'm helping you realize by implementing, and then I'm setting you up for success and maybe bowing out, right? Versus more of the MSP model, like I'm here to say, I'm going to be your virtual CIO. You tell me what business outcomes you want to drive, and I'll help you get there. So it's more than using business outcomes as a sales tactic. It's literally their business principle to be able to deliver that for their clients. And so when you look at it, there's a lot of ways, a lot of different services that can be impacted from the two. So I think that's what I see. Maybe I hate to go too far out, 3 to 5 years, because I see so much change in just a year or two. But in the immediate future, I think that's the opportunities when you start to see more resellers as clients start to maybe back away from IT investment. How do more resellers maybe evolve their practice to be MSP like and go up the stack?
Well, I was talking to a partner the other day, and right, like they're wanting to offer at the end of the day a flat monthly price, right? And then like within that monthly price, there are a number of different things included: hardware, licensing, PS, so one-time services plus recurring managed services, like all those things into one number, right? And so if you think about that, you have the professional services scoping part or pricing part, you have the managed recurring piece, you have product, which could be either one-time or recurring, and then potentially you have like a third party delivering some of those services, and then you have financing to help like consume and make this all easily attainable for this partner's end client, right? So like before it was very much, hey, we're going to do a PS project, or we're going to do a managed project, or third party deliver. But now you're talking about 5 or 6 things, components into like one number. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, that's where that ecosystem comes in.
And this is where you're going to keep me up tonight, because I'm going to be thinking about that. Because as you're describing these like 5 pillars, what I'm thinking about is, to your point, it all needs to come together into one number. But I'm thinking about how many people, how many hours does it take to get to that one number, right? Because it's a collaborative exercise across multiple stakeholders to make that happen. And you go back to what we described earlier, right? You could get there through people, you can get there through bots, you can get there through API automation. So those problem statements exist all over the place in the business. So there's immense amount of opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I think like identifying the process and who do you talk to when you have to do all these deals. And I think, you know, it's worth the investment if you're trying to make outcomes easy to attain for your clients. Because again, say I'm an MSP, my end client's a dentist. He doesn't care what technology, he doesn't care what third party, they don't care at the end of the day, right? Like they just want that one number because that's how they budget it. And then they want the outcome and the assurance that goes along with it, right? And so to me, it is worth building a system and a process to make that easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the MSPs I engage with, you know, they all have a very similar DNA, right? They typically have a technical due diligence on the front end to kind of really vet what technologies they're going to represent to really drive those business outcomes. And then that will translate into an SOP and an SOW. Like, what's the operational procedure to execute on each given solution that I'm going to represent? And then how do I actually deliver services in accordance with that deliverable? So there's an immense amount of opportunity to just introduce automation there.
But see, that's what I think is so cool about you and your team, and kind of how, like, I'd say 3 or 4 years ago, you know, distribution didn't care about what services I was offering because it wasn't this holistic thing. It was just, I mean, it's an evolution, right? So it's like, it is what it is. But it's the solution and the overall, again, I've said outcome a billion times here, but like it's the overall outcome that everyone wants to get to. And it's easier said than done sometime, but it's worth it. So
it's, you know, it was a blind spot for us in distribution, right? Because we were pretty focused on the product sale, maybe the services attached, and it was very methodical, right? And it was scalable, it drove velocity. But again, as margins get compressed, you got to start being creative in your thinking in terms of how you're going to introduce value. And I think, again, where we got smarter is about understanding who's actually making the decision within the environment. So when you're talking about influencing the outcome, how compelling is it to go to an MSP, represent a vendor that historically has a complex association, and speak their language? So you kind of get them over the technical hurdle in terms of what it does for the client, but then you also can thread it through what's important to them, their SOP, their SOW. If you can do that, you win an MSP all day long. Like, you make the sales pitch so much easier. So by that token, by you doing that due diligence with that specific MSP, I mean, when you see MSPs, they're a pretty dedicated community. Like, they are loyal to, not to a fault, they are loyal to a technology, loyal to their communities. And the fact is, if you can win over that community, you can win big. That's where you can drive sales velocity. If I'm a sales guy, like that's kind of a motion that you can adopt and be extremely successful with if you do it the right way.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy the other day, and I mean, talk about like the kind of transparency. Like, imagine going into a client conversation, and you can set down these SOPs. You can set down like, hey, this is what we use. This is our playbook that we use to deliver this service, right? And it's in a 3-ring binder or whatever. Like, I don't know. I don't think people use 3-ring binders anymore. But like, you go in and you say, we've done this before. We've taken the time to invest. We've labbed this out. We've done whatever we needed to do to be able to come in here and have an intelligent conversation about it. You know, and like, I think you mentioned that they're loyal. I think that transparency and like the expertise that comes with it is another value add that they bring to any conversation.
Yeah. But this is why I get excited about like what you bring to the table, right? Because you started your journey really focused on services because that was your bread and butter growing up, and you realized the pain and the challenge that was associated with that. So the beauty of the model that you've developed is that you can evolve to kind of encompass a broader problem statement. So when I talk about, hey, it's my job as TD SYNNEX to convince them to buy the technology, let me partner with you so you can standardize and automate kind of the SOP, SOW process. Like it's a very compelling value proposition. And I think that's why, we're going to win.
Yeah.
Right. That's why it's going to be, it's easy to be confident in that go to market because it's validated and it's customer driven.
Yeah. 100%. All right. So, kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? Like you've been there, you've done this, you've seen what it takes to be successful in this industry. Mm-hmm. Like, so what are one or two practical things based off what we're just talking about, or you can choose a completely different topic, but like, what are one or two things that you would recommend that of our MSP could start doing today to help them in this journey, in this transformation? Like, where would you start?
Start with the pain. So, the first thing that I do, I try to do these, we call them skip levels, but the people on the front lines have the most knowledge on the business. Like, I don't know anything, right? They know everything. They live and breathe it all day long. So I try to spend time with them and really try to understand. They're very good about being transparent in terms of the issues, the challenges, the opportunities they're presented with. I think if you take a hard look at as a executive stakeholder in, like, let's just say an MSP or a VAR, I mean, everybody is challenged on delivering the bottom line. And if you spend time with folks on the front line, you start to understand and unpack some of those challenges. And you realize that there's opportunities to streamline and up-level the organization. Yeah. I think that's what allows you to kind of grow the top line. I think that's what allows you to grow the bottom line 2 or 3x the top line. So I think, and moving to recurring revenue and things like that presents new challenges. So listen and pivot. Like, you got to make those investments to help reward the organization for a long term.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, again, you and I could talk about this stuff all day long, and we have talked about this stuff for days. But I just really appreciate you kind of bringing in and really just bringing a fresh perspective on, again, what 5 years ago, what was my perspective of distribution is not that anymore, and that's largely because of you and like what you're bringing to the market. So, thank you for being one of those leaders that just thinks outside the box, because it's kind of rare, quite honestly, and looking for different ways to make our industry better, right? Not just your bank account.
Yeah, exactly. No, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. So, Nicko, if anyone wants to catch up with you, talk about this kind of stuff, or just learn more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to find you out on the interwebs?
Find me on LinkedIn. I'm going to be tagged, so feel free to ping me directly, inbox me, and then 813-966-3755. Send me a text if you want to chat.
Oh, man, he gives his phone number
all day long. Absolutely. I'm very open with anybody and myself, so feel free to cascade that.
I was going to charge people for your phone number, but now I can't. So fair enough. Well, again, Nicko, thanks for joining us, man. I really appreciate it. I know you got a lot going on, but
thank you.
For those of you listening, thank you for joining us on the InScope podcast. What we want to bring to this podcast in our community is just some perspective on how to mature, how to make yourself a better services organization. You can use some of the things that Nicko mentioned here today, but if you're interested in learning more about ScopeStack, you can go to scopestack.io and learn more. And if you want to check out any of the other past episodes, you can go to scopestack.io/podcast. So again, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you out there.